Hello and welcome to episode 56 of The Thing About Golf, Golf Australia magazine's ongoing quest to figure out what it is that hooks people on this infuriating game. Rod Murray's my name, and alongside my colleague John Huggan, we get to talk to golfers from all corners of the game, including, as we will today, those from the world of TV. The name and voice of Hazel Irvine will be familiar to many from her more than 25 years of part of the BBC's coverage of golf, and in particular, the Open. John Huggan was at many of those events and got to know Hazel pretty well over those years. Huggy, bit of a trailblazer, Hazel Irvine, not a token part of the appointment. This is a woman who really knows her stuff.
Absolutely. It's hard to speak too highly of Hazel. I mean, I'm a huge fan of her work on not just the golf, but any number of sports on the BBC. She still does things like the snooker and the Olympics on a regular basis. And if you want to see somebody doing their job really, really, really well, just watch Hazel Irvine on television. She is absolutely the top at what she does. I mean, it's seamless, the way she joins things up. It's a very difficult job. I can only imagine what's going on in her ear, microphones going and voices and all the rest of it, but you would never tell. I mean, there is absolutely nobody does a better job than Hazel does at that kind of thing.
This is high praise indeed from somebody who doesn't speak glowingly always about our friends in television. We understand their constraints.
Not always, no.
No, indeed. I haven't had a chance to yet listen to the chat, Huggy, but I'm getting the sense it might be like a few of us. It's going to be a chat between two old friends. You must have enjoyed having a sit down with Hazel.
Yeah, we're both from the same part of the world. Mm-hmm. She has the great honour of being. She was born in St Andrews. Can you believe?
Wow.
Not that she grew up there. Her family moved. I think she was 4 when they moved to the uncivilized part of the country over across in the west, somewhere near Glasgow. She'll laugh when she hears me say that. But she's I've known Hazel a long time. I don't know her really, really well, but well enough to call her a friend. Yeah, she's. But as I say, my admiration for her is almost. I almost find it hard to put into words how good she is at her job. I mean, it's very, very difficult because she makes it look so easy. She's one of those people that it just looks easy and she makes the difficult thing look so easy, and it's brilliant to watch.
That's what professionals do, isn't it, Huggy? Professional golfers do it, professional sports people do it, professional broadcasters do it. They make the very difficult look.
I would have no idea about that kind of thing. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, Huggy, I'm looking forward to having a sit and being a fly on the wall and listening to the two of you chat. Thanks for joining us for a quick intro today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay, here we go with the latest edition of the Thing About Golf podcast. I'm joined today by my fellow countrywoman and one of the most admired broadcasters, I think, certainly in the UK, if not in the rest of the planet, Hazel Irvine. Hazel, I always start with the same question on these podcasts. What was the thing about golf for you?
Well, hello, John. First of all, can I say what an absolute delight it is to speak to my old friend. Thank you for that marvelous introduction.
Stop
the money
it.
in the post. The thing about golf, John, is that it's in the DNA. If you've started early in your life and you've had that bug and it's gripped you, then it stays with you and you can't help it and you can't shake it. And even if you spend a long time away from it, either not playing it or just dabbling or just watching it, it just gets its claws into you and you can't help it. And it's addictive. And I just think if you're a golfer or you aspire to be a golfer, it just doesn't leave you. And that's the thing about golf. It's a lifelong addiction.
Well, you got off to the perfect start, if you will, because you were born in St Andrews, of all places. I know you didn't grow up there. Tell me how you got into golf to start with. We'll go from there.
Okay. Well, I was born in St Andrews, that's right. And I lived in Fife, the Kingdom of Fife, for the first 4 years of my life. And then I moved across to the other side of Scotland. And I was there in a wee place called Cardross, which is a very fine golf course. And my dad was very keen. And I do remember some of the earliest times walking with my dad. He used to try and get my brother and myself. My brother is 3 years younger than me. So I think I probably was introduced to it in terms of walking around with my dad when I was about probably 7 or 8, John. And I think he just tried to encourage us. It was more like a walk. He was trying to get the family out for a walk. And I remember being handed a cut down club. It was a bog standard. It must have been a 5-iron, something like that. I can't really remember. And he cut it right down, and I was just puttering about with it. But I genuinely do remember the first time that I got loft on it. I actually hit a shot, and they went up in the air, and I think that was it. I thought, wow. And it was just that sort of instant gratification, the feeling of I did that, and it went, and I think that's all it takes.
Yeah, well, it's one of the great milestones, isn't it?
It is. And I remember joining the club when I was probably about, I think probably 9 or 10. And I do remember summers in Scotland when they were glorious, about sort of 76, 77, being sort of, I can't remember, about 10, 11, 12, around the time. And I do remember my summer holidays, I would spend all day there at the golf course. And I would play 2 rounds a day, and I would have lunch. I'd have, I don't know, a sausage sandwich or something like that the club would make. And you get some pocket money, and you'd have a drink, and then you'd be back out there putting in the lunch hour, and then you'd be back out there for another game, obviously holding up all the members with your rubbish play. But I do remember with great fondness those well-spent youthful summers on the golf course. And I have sort of wonderful, beautiful, hazy, hot memories of golf. It must have been a rather specific period in time, John, because obviously you don't get many of them in Scotland at the moment. But that was how I got started, and then I started to improve. I had a couple of lessons, but mostly it was kind of self-taught, and also my dad. My dad was very keen to teach both my brother and myself. I was a bit of a chucker for a while. I was a bit of a club chucker. And then I realised that that didn't help. I think there is probably an 8-iron still lost somewhere along the way. But I realised that it really wasn't becoming of me. And it didn't actually do any good. So I stopped chucking clubs and practised a bit more. Yeah.
Now, tell me, what was your experience like as a girl in the golf club? I mean, the notoriously girls who start as you did at a young age, they get lost to the game, in their mid-teens, that things happen and they drift off. What was your experience, and how were you treated at the golf club?
Well, that's a really good point, because my sort of hazy memories of it were also quite lonely memories, if I'm honest, because there weren't many of us. I think the club had a good junior section at the time, and all were encouraged. But you're right, there really weren't many. There was a girl called Jill Kinloch, and Jill actually became a professional, and she was very good and uber competitive. Yeah, I remember Jill. So we used to play quite a bit together, but obviously her timetable was different from mine. There was another couple of girls that I used to chum up with, but I did chum up with the boys a lot. I played with the guys, played with my brother, played with quite a lot of the boys, and sometimes just played by myself quite a bit. So you're right, there really weren't many, but I think that sort of feeling of being not other, that's wrong, but in the minority, was actually quite a motivating factor for me. There was always a sort of "I'll show you" type, and I don't know whether that and that wasn't because in any way I was treated badly. On the contrary, I think it was just because I was one of not many young girls who were members at the time and who were active all the time. But I don't remember it being a hindrance, and I certainly don't remember it with any degree of malice or bad blood in that respect. It was just the way it was, John. It's different now, I hope, and I hope things are getting better in that regard.
Well, it's certainly improving. I mean, there's no question. But for a long, long time, the golf club was not the sort of most welcoming environment for children, and particularly female children. But obviously, your experience was better than that, thankfully.
No, it was, and there was no question about it not being welcoming. It was the junior section, and the junior section, regardless of boys or girls, we played at set times. We were allowed to play during the summer a lot more, and I always found the club to be very welcoming. Obviously, and golf courses and golf clubs are places of rules. And I do respect those rules, and I like to play by the rules in that regard. So I think there was a discipline to be learned, whether you were male or female, about being a member of a club and abiding by the rules and playing by the rules when you're out in the course. And, those were lessons that I found valuable rather than to be rebelled against in that regard. So, my experience was positive in that regard, but it was just a little bit lonely. Yeah.
Now, I'm going to move you on a few years. I've got a very good question here for you. Tell me everything you know about the history of art.
Ooh, well, that was probably, I would say it would take a while, but it's been a while since I actually thought about it. Yes, that was where I ended up. I went off to University of St Andrews, my birthplace. I think there was a sort of romantic longing to be back there, but there was also the very strong allure of many rather good golf courses to be played. That was definitely an attraction. And I played golf for the university's golf team for a long while. Really enjoyed it, and actually the small story about that, John, is that the new course was the kind of home for the university courses at the time. We used to play our matches against other unis on the new, and I absolutely loved the new course. I still actually prefer it to the old in many respects, because at the time it was more appropriate for budding golfers like myself. The subtleties of the old course were learned with some very hard lessons along the way, but I loved the new course. It was more sheltered. I used to play the Jubilee course at St Andrews as well, which was far more windblown. You used to get e-rake in your right ear going out and e-rake in your left ear coming back home again because of the location of the holes. But I used to play a lot of golf there, and that was, again, part of the attraction. But when I wasn't playing golf or running and athletics teams in general, I was a bit of a fitness nerd in those days. I was studying history of art and English. In fact, I started a joint honours degree with English and history of art, which I was enjoying. But I found that there's only one person that ever done the joint degree, and unfortunately it did mean that rather than it being sort of 50-50, it was kind of 75-75 of both. And after about 4 weeks of going into junior honours year, I discovered that there just really weren't enough hours in the day to do 75% of both courses, and I had to plump for the one that I really enjoyed. And by this point I was absolutely loving history of art, and I did that to senior honours, and I got my degree, my honours degree in history of art, and I majored in 20th century modernism and postmodernism, believe it or not, and I combined that with medieval manuscript illumination. so figure that out. But I loved it, and it's still a bit of a passion. I still collect things. I'm interested in it. And so that was my sort of academic passion, which went hand in hand and in tandem with my sporting love at St Andrews. Yeah.
Now, tell the listeners where you lived while you were a student and the view from your window. I've always envied this story.
Oh, I know. I tell you what, it's still one of my great memories, and I can put myself back into this spot anytime I want. I used to be the senior student, actually. I was voted a senior student at Hamilton Hall of Residence. Now, for those who don't know that building, it is the big red building. It used to be a hotel, and it is right next to the Royal and Ancient Clubhouse. And as my senior student year, in the fourth year, I was allowed to choose the room that I wanted for my last year, being senior student. So I chose room number 90. Which was on the fourth floor, and it had a room directly looking onto the 18th green on the old course, right down that beautiful, beautiful view, and right across out to the West Sands, overlooking the Royal and Ancient Golf Club, the clubhouse there. And I had my desk pushed right up against the window. And I used to look out there and pretend that I was working. And eventually, when it came towards my final exams, I eventually had to move the desk away from the window, because my time was spent looking at golfers playing the 18th and going short, valley ascent, short, Valley of Sin. Oh, that one's on. That's near the starter's hut. So I used to watch everybody coming up the last and fantasizing about the next time I could get on the old course. So it was a fantastic room, and I still have a beautiful picture of it in my house, and I can take myself back. And actually, just as a sort of adjunct to that, my best friend and myself, Anne, every morning in the 6 weeks up to my final examinations, we used to leave the breakfast hall downstairs. We used to go out. We used to turn to the right, go down the scores, across Granny Clark's Wynd, which is the road that basically sort of divides the first and 18th fairways from the top and bottom parts, if you like, come back up, past the starter's hut, past the big window at the clubhouse that you could always peer into, back, straight in, and we walked straight into the library and started our studies. So that was how we started our day for those very fraught last 6 weeks ahead of our finals. So many of my memories are entrenched in views of St Andrews and sort of calming walks along the West Sands. And it's just a place that I can go to in my head even now. And I still dream about it, John. I still dream about those days of being in that room and the views. And it's something that my mind seems to go back to quite a bit. Yeah.
Well, just to complete the circle, and I believe you're now a member of the R&A, no less, one of the first women members. Tell me about that.
Right, yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, it was a bit of a surprise. I'd obviously been working in golf for a long time as a broadcaster, and I'd been sort of working at the Open Championship as part of the BBC's broadcast team since about, I think, 2000, 2001, something like that, John said, 2000. But I've been doing the women's golf coverage. I've been presenting that since about 1992. So I sort of mixed and matched between the women's and men's tours, but worked more regularly on the men's golf from about 2000, and eventually took over. I did a secondary presentation to the wonderful and inimitable Steve Ryder, who was just my absolute dream broadcaster, and I really don't think there are many better and ever will be better than Steve. And I think in those days, John, just as a sort of, again, slightly tangential, in those days, you were either a kind of Des Lynam person or you were a Steve Ryder person. It's a bit like the sort of Cohen Ovett of broadcasting. You either preferred one style to the other. And for me, with the greatest of respect to Desi, who was a wonderful sort of mischievous broadcaster, I really loved Stevie's grasp and calmness and unflappability. And his ability he never obviously worked from a script, as did very few in those days, and just made it up as he went along. But his command of language and his ability to sum up a situation and remain calm but still convey enthusiasm was something I always loved. Anyway, I worked along with Steve, who was always a fantastic and generous person to work with. And then I worked with Gary Lineker, was in the role as well, and then Gary decided to stop, and then I was sort of given the main presenter's job, and I did that from about 2009, 2010, and I was so privileged to work at Open Championships and the Masters and to sit in that chair. It was the greatest thrill. And after a few years of that, I received an invitation to become a member of the R&A, which was incredibly fulfilling and incredibly. I think it was a very important milestone for me, but also I think it was a hugely positive development for the Royal and Ancient too, and I think that's widely recognised. And I've been made so welcome. I've played in a couple of tournaments and have thoroughly enjoyed the experience and have been made extremely welcome. So I'm very honoured to be a part of it. Not least, I think, because, John, of my connection with the town. Obviously, having been born there, but I think also the fact that the club itself is such a huge part of the town, and I feel such a huge part of the town, not least because of my sort of my connections, having been born there, but also having gone to university there. So for me, it was sort of, it squared a circle in a way. I do remember in one of my old days at St Andrews, in one of my final years, the university used to run golf holidays, and I volunteered to be part of it, to help run it. In other words, I was paid to play golf for 6 weeks during the summer. It was an absolute no-brainer. We stayed in Hamilton Hall of Residence, where I was living at the time, and several of my friends did so as well. And we basically, guests came and stayed at the university, and we played the old course. We had to go in for the ballots, all the rest of it, but it was all very well done. But I do remember that sort of frisson of going and knocking on the big doors in order to collect tapes of old championships past at St Andrews, and the thrill of walking in there and taking these tapes and thinking, "God, this is fab," and walking out. And so, but then to be able to walk through the doors as a bona fide member was not least thrilling, but it was. I feel really honoured to be a part of it. Yeah, it's just a part of history, I think, as much as anything, John. Just to be there.
Yeah. I mean, how did you feel about that kind of wider issue? I mean, I've written about all this a million times, but I never really had a problem with single-sex clubs per se. In that, if somebody wants to be a member of a club like that, fine. I mean, who am I to say you can't do it? I mean, it's not for me, but I'm not going to dictate to other people. But I did think it was slightly different for the RNA, given that they make the rules for everybody around the world, kind of thing, and for them to be discriminating against sort of half the world's population had to be something that was fixed. I mean, I don't know how you felt about subjects like that, but I mean, how did you come at it?
Well, I mean, like you, I always felt it would be I think it would be a beneficial route to go down, because you're quite right in as much as a governing body or a club which is very much in everybody's minds as a sort of focal point for the sport. I think it was more of it was an image situation as much as anything, and I take on board what you say, because it's something that I had been, if not actively campaigning for, then certainly agitating for some time in my own way. As you know, I'm quite a private person, and I don't go out of my way to create headlines or to do things for the sake of doing them. But I do try and work behind the scenes in many respects on this and other matters, actually. So I did feel that it was. I think the term "missing a trick" is possibly more apposite in this, because I do think that image so much these days does count. And from my own perspective as a female broadcaster, I've often been told that, oh, you're a role model and you go in there and you've shown people what to do. I didn't really consider the impact of that until, ironically, girls used to start writing to me and say, I'd like to do what you did. And I didn't actually consider that I was having any impact on that. I was just trying to do what I was doing in broadcasting, and whether that was against the grain or whether it was certainly, it wasn't it was kind of groundbreaking, but I never perceived it as groundbreaking. I just was trying to do my job because it was something that I love. So I wasn't in any way trying to get on some feminist charger and go, with my sword in hand. Not at all. I was trying to do my job, but then when people started to write to me, I thought, oh, okay. And in fact, weirdly enough, Ailey Barber, who's now presenting the golf for the BBC, this story is absolutely true. She did write to me as a 14-year-old, and I did write, but thank goodness, I wrote back. And she said, how do I get in to television? And I said, well, these are some of the avenues that I can suggest that you try and work towards, and you do this and da. And I'm glad I did, because some years later, she turned up on a snooker gig that I was working with, and she was working as a young producer with IMG. And it was pointed out to me that Ailey was down there, and she was a bit reticent to come and say hello. And I said, goodness. And she said, yeah, I did write to you, and I couldn't believe it. And since then, she said that having seen me doing Grandstand when I was quite young, she said, I didn't know girls could do that. I didn't know girls were allowed to do that. And that really struck a chord with me, because it wasn't a question of being allowed to. It was for me, it was being accepted. But yet I see other young women saying they didn't think they were allowed to. And that kind of cut me to the quick a little bit. I thought, wow, that's amazing. So that's where I'm coming at this, John, because I do feel that perhaps there was a perception that they weren't welcome because they weren't allowed. This is women in clubs, just as men weren't allowed or accepted in women's clubs. And I do think those are barriers to participation generally, whether it's a men's club or a women's club. You're right; people are perfectly within their rights to do these things, but I think it was more of an image situation, and I think the responsibility to create avenues for inclusion. For men, women, and for all sectors of society. It was just an open goal waiting to be scored. And I think they've finally put the ball in the net now, and I think everybody's relieved and happy about it. I certainly am.
Yeah, I think you're dead right about the image thing. I mean, goodness knows, I've had a few pops at the RNA over the years on various subjects, and they do suffer still from that, and they've made great strides. The old image of the
really
guy sleeping in the chair, under the Daily Telegraph, with the gin and tonic on the table and the soup stain on the tie and all that stuff. I mean, those days are long gone. I mean, the RNA, the organisation now that runs the Open and all things, they're young and they do a lot of really good things. But the image lives on. I mean, it's going to take a long time for that image to disappear, sadly.
Well, I think, but that you could probably roll that out to many other aspects of society as well. Change does take some time, but I think that the positive strides have been made, and I can honestly say that in terms of the welcome that I was given, it was tremendous. I've got to be honest here, John. When I was working on the Open Championship, particularly Peter Dawson and many others, Ian Patterson, so many of the guys that I met, Jim MacArthur, these guys were nothing but supportive of me. I mean, genuinely, in private and in public, supportive of the efforts that I was doing as a broadcaster. And I had nothing but good relations with all of the guys on the committee. So I can honestly say, from a personal perspective, I never had a problem. And I count many of these guys as my friends and colleagues. I've had some great fun with them over the years, and I really hope that image is changing, because it deserves to change, because of there's a lot of water under the bridge in these things, but I really hope that we're moving to a much more positive image for golf generally, and I think that this is a really good step forward for golf all over the world. And I think Martin's women's golf. Well, Martin Slumber's women's golf charter, which I helped to launch a few years back up on the Shard in London. What a fantastic uptake that there's been around the world. And I think that was a hugely important step as well. So things are changing, but sport is changing. The world is changing. I mean, we've just come through 2 years of a pandemic, which has changed everybody's perception of everything, frankly. So there's just so much work to be done as everybody's trying to sort of navigate these rather strange and uncertain times still.
Yeah, you mentioned Peter Dawson. I can't let it go by without mentioning my relationship with him was slightly more adversarial at times, but we ended up getting on very well. But I used to go to lunch fairly regularly, or occasionally, the RNA with the late, great Renton Laidlaw. And when we'd bump into Peter Dawson in the clubhouse, he always greeted me with the same line, which was, "Who let you in?" So, but he was a good man.
Oh, yeah, certainly. And I've always got on very well with his wife Juliet as well. And we've had some fun with Peter over the years. And a more passionate advocate for golf you could not meet. He absolutely lives and breathes the game. And it's so good to see him branching out into other fields within golf, because I just felt there was so much more that Peter wanted to do within golf, and it's great to see him having done that, and playing such an important part in in getting golf into the Olympics, and what a huge success that has been. I mean, absolutely fundamentally important to the growth of the game, and such a welcome addition or re-addition to the Olympic programme. And you've seen it the last 2 games. What brilliant golf we've had. What great competitions, especially the first one with Henrik and Justin striding down the fairways in Rio on that effectively the playoff. Brilliant stuff. Yeah, really good.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm a convert to that. I had doubts about it to begin with, whether golf had a place in the Olympics, and I got the argument that there was a lot of money that could be pumped into the game by governments because it was an Olympic sport. That I got that argument, but I wasn't 100% convinced that it was going to work just as an Olympic sport. But you're right. I mean, it's been terrific. The past one there where Schauffele won was terrific. Yeah,
it really was. I was actually on the air for that one, Sorry, John.
No, I was just going to say, and you've preempted one of my questions. I've just scored through golf in the Olympics off my list of questions for you, so you beat me to it on that one. Well,
actually, I was on the air with that one, John, and we had all sorts of other events planned to go to, but of course that playoff, which was sort of a 300 strong playoff, or it felt like, with Paul Casey involved as well. I was so desperate for Paul to get that medal. He was so close to getting one, and I know John McLaren, his caddy, very well, and I'd been sort of messaging them throughout the whole time saying, you can do this, and Rory involved as well. But it struck me just how important these things were. Schauffele played brilliantly to win. But I think also just that struggle for a bronze medal, you could see just how important it was to get your hands on a precious bit of metal, because, the Olympics, and Justin always said this, you can win US Opens, you can win Masters, and you're part of history. But to have that gold medal is just something so special. And I think there's always this delineation between what people thought of the professional sports, tennis, golf. Does it really matter to them as much? That was always the argument, wasn't it? But when I saw Justin, particularly in 2016 in Rio, in the tracksuit, attending every conceivable event, and just loving being an Olympian, this is long before he even played, and then wearing that thing around his neck wherever he went and taking it out of his bag and seeing the joy in people's faces when they put it over the net. That's an Olympic gold medal and I won it, So for me, again, it's visibility, and I guess that goes back to the heart of my love of sport is its ability to inspire and to provoke change in people's life and to put them on different pathways. And for me, that has always been the attraction, not just of golf, but of sport. And it's encapsulated within the Olympics. So my 2 main passions, golf and the Olympics, to see them come together like that in such a meaningful way has been very rewarding as well.
Yeah, I think if anybody ever needed totally convincing, it was the line from Rory after the last one where he said he'd never tried so hard in his life to finish third.
Exactly what I'm saying. It's a bit of metal, but it means so much more, doesn't it? And I felt very, very devastated for both Rory and for Paul that it didn't come off. But there's other chances.
Hazel, I want to drag you into your broadcasting career a bit more. You've covered all kinds of things over the years.
Sorry about that. I do go off a tangent, John.
No, it's fine. I've enjoyed listening to it so far. Keep it up. I just wondered how golf compares for a broadcaster. Is it more difficult? Is it different? Is it easier? How does it fit within the kind of stratosphere of all the things you've done?
I think it's probably one of the most rewarding things that I've done, because it appeals to my knowledge and my early experiences of playing golf and appreciating what are good shots. Because if you've played golf and you know how difficult it is to move a ball left to right or right to left or to whatever it is, to chip and run, to play subtle shots, you appreciate skill and subtlety. But more than that, for me, I love golf because of the psychology. I love the psychological drama of golf, particularly in a major championship. It is so addictive for me. And the best thing ever when I was a child was shutting the curtains with my father and my brother. My mum had more sense. On the start of the coverage of the Open Championship in July, and not moving for 4 days. And we used to get it all sorted and shut it, and just the pure drama of that, and knowing that someone probably unknown was going to top the leaderboard on day one, and then you'd start to see the others, who's within striking distance. But for me, the psychological drama and the nature of it was what fascinated me. But what fascinated me more than anything else was, why were there repeat winners? Why could some players do this, not habitually, but constantly? Why could they be there at the top? What separated the serial winners from the guys who had this brilliant one-off week? And there are many that do that, obviously. But the serial winners, what separated them? And so I always was fascinated with that as a child, and then as a broadcaster, that appealed to me even more, because I had to really start looking at their history. And as you probably know, John, part of my modus operandi is to be as prepared for a championship, maybe not for a podcast, sorry, but to be as prepared and as well read and as well informed as I possibly could be. And that meant the minutiae of 148 players' lives at that point. I always made it my absolute mission beforehand to make sure that I could recall at least 6 things about every single player in that field at the drop of a hat. So that's how I would work. But it always occurred to me when I was looking at these things, what was it that was separating the top guys? And ultimately, for me, when I looked through all of the biogs, I knew all the information, it was the head. It was the mentality, it was the brain, it was the control of the emotions which separated the absolute legends of the game from those who would have their moment in the sun once or maybe twice. And that is still what fascinates me. So to answer your question in a very long and roundabout way, that's the fascination of golf for me. And therefore, as a broadcaster, I did get much more out of golf in that regard, because the fascination of seeing who could rise to those challenges and who could overcome the emotions and who could control themselves in those moments was fascinating. And in the back nine of a major, John, when you're in a broadcaster's chair, the world turns very quickly. I can't describe to you how difficult it is as a broadcaster to stay in the moment and actually look at the big picture, because it's actually hard to remember what happened 2 minutes ago. Who's just, they made a body. You've got a leaderboard in front of you, but it's changing so quickly, and the psychology of the drama changes so quickly. You've got to really make a proper conscious effort to step back and try to say, well, what is happening here? He's 4 up with 3 to play. Oh, okay, or whatever it is. Or that's a bad idea. He's 2 up with 2 to play. So, but you have to really step back from that and think. So as a broadcaster, the challenge of remaining calm and processing the information and conveying the story in those final moments is hugely, hugely difficult. It takes a lot of composure, and it takes a lot of discipline and thought. So therefore, as a broadcaster, that was what was rewarding. When you got to the end of it and you stayed in control and you tried to convey the right amount of information and ask the right questions, and you come off of it and you felt on top of the world to have played even a small part in bringing that story to the general public. It was just fantastic. And say, for example, at the Masters, just the sense of relief that it's over, but also the sense of achievement and fulfillment, if it had gone well, is hard to describe. So as a broadcaster, it's amongst the absolute top moments of my career to have been involved in those, particularly the major championships, and ranks alongside, but for different reasons, the Olympic Games, which are basically you're spinning 28 different plates at the one time and needing knowledge about lots, 10,000 athletes potentially. That's a different intellectual challenge. But knowing, and I did get the same thing with snooker, I have to know a lot more about fewer players in order to make this interesting to people. Because it's dead easy to say, what do you think of that then, eh? to your pundits, but you have to know more about these guys' lives in order to inform your commentary. That was always the intellectual challenge for me, but also the real reward when you felt that you told the story accurately. That's a very long answer. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm going to ask you to generalise now a little bit in that where do golfers compare, or how do golfers compare with people from other sports as interviews? I mean, they have a pretty good reputation, golfers, for being, generally speaking, quite bright and give good answers. But what do you think?
I agree with you. I think they're amongst the most thoughtful interviewees because they're one-man bands in many respects. They have a team, but they are very self-reliant on the course. And it always fascinates me when you ask a golfer what were the key moments, he or she will say, well, what I was thinking about with that third shot to the third green was this. And they can recall every shot, everything every computation that they've gone through. So therefore, I think there's a huge intellectual element about golfers, male and female, that I find very interesting to try and mine in an interview. I really enjoy doing that. So I think you're right. And some of the best interviews that I've been able to do have been with golfers who are very thoughtful. And if they've got the time and you ask them the right questions, you get some very meaningful answers. But generally, John, I think what we've seen in sport over the last 20 years, particularly in Great Britain, has been the professionalisation or in a psychological sense of many of these athletes. And I've seen it particularly in Olympic athletes that perhaps were very much reliant on the emotion and on that inspiration and on that determination, all these words we used to use. But now they've been trained so highly in sports psychology that they're able to identify which triggers are likely to... They're able to think much more clearly in the difficult moments where we'd go, we'd run away, but they're able to handle things. So I think generally speaking, there's been a move for a much more professional psychological approach to sport, and that does yield some interesting interviews. So golfers are amongst the best, but I think generally speaking, you're getting a much more rounded interview with sports people generally these days.
Who are your favourite golfers to talk to?
If they'll reveal. My favourite golfers. What I always say that one of the most satisfying people to talk to was Nick Price. That's going a long way back, and the reason is because if you asked him a question that was considered and half decent, he would give you a considered and very decent answer and response. He never gave glib answers, and he always thought about what he was going to say. So I always respected him for taking the time, not least, to answer a question. It would have been easy to say, yeah, because I did. Or, yeah, no, it was all right. But he would always give you a full answer, and he would always answer your question. So I always enjoyed speaking to him. I always enjoyed speaking to somebody like Justin. Justin Rose is a very good man to interview because for the same reason. Podrick was always a fantastic interviewee because it would all just come out at you. Because he did nothing but think. I loved him for that. Yeah. Whether that was good or bad, only Podrick knows. It certainly yielded a lot of success, didn't it? So those are amongst my favourites. I also enjoyed the challenge of speaking to some people. There were some who I felt it was difficult, and you're always going to get a guarded response. That was always challenging. I won't go names and pack drill on that one, John, but I find that's, if you know you're going to get defensive hackles up from the start, I always found that quite challenging. But in general, I found most golfers to be approachable, open and honest. And the other one was Tom Watson. Tom was always brilliant with me, I must say. I always loved speaking to Tom for the same reason that out of pure fascination, you could go places with Tom, not just about his round, but into areas of his past that he might be willing to speak to you about that you still find fascinating. So I always had a great respect and a lot of time for Tom Watson too. Yeah,
we've had both Nick Price and Podrick as guests on this very podcast, and you're right, they were both terrific. So great men. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about the inevitably a guy I loved being around or sitting I've sat in his living room a few times and just put the tape recorder on and asked him one question and sat back for 2.5 hours. That was Peter Alice. You must have some.
I know you're.
So you must have some Peter Alice anecdotes, because everybody does.
I know. Oh gosh, what a man! What a man! I do miss him, John. I really miss him. He's in a way he's not gone though, because it's a bit like my room at St Andrews. I can always be there, but with Peter, I can always be with him because he's just such a huge presence in my life. Probably like everybody feels like that, but how could you sum up Peter? It's so difficult to sum up Peter, but I was thinking about this before we came on, and whenever I think of him, I see him in the big chair in the studio that we used to have. We used to have a mobile studio when we were doing the golf, and he would come in. He was usually the first person there in the morning. Even I was a bit of an early bird, but Peter would be there. And I do remember at Hoylake, I think it was, the year that Rory won, I remember coming in at the crack of dawn. I used to get in ridiculously early to try and get myself ready. And Peter would be sitting in his chair. And I'd say, God, what time did you get in? Oh, I've been here for a while, he'd say, you know. And I remember this conversation I had with him. This big man, big presence in the room. You always knew when Peter was there. Not just in terms of the physicality aspect of the man, but just there was an element there was a frisson when he was in the room, because you never knew what he was going to say. There was an element of danger with him. He was never, ever predictable. Yeah. You could never second guess him. And that was always the thrill and the slight kind of eek as well. But I remember sitting there, and those were my favourite times with him. It was just me and him. And before people were getting in. And he would sit there, and I remember he turned round and he said, "What have you been doing, kidder?" He used to call me kidder. And he said, I've been watching the clubhouse, you know. And he said, "There's some starlings in the roof. I've been watching them since I don't know when, and they just come in and out." And I think, okay. He said, "They've been there for 8. You just the mother just goes in." So he was so obsessed with this. He said, "And there's a lot of people coming in today. I've seen a lot of picnic baskets, and they think they're going to." So he watched. He was a people and a thing watcher. He was genuinely interested in stuff. I had my nose in my books. Oh, I needed to know the stats about greens and regulation. Yeah. By the time we went on the air, mm-hmm. He looked and he felt and he tested the temperature, and he was able to inform his commentary with observations that were much bigger than stats. And I think that's why people loved him. And for me, I'll always hear his voice in my head, and I'll always have that image and those special memories of him. I think one of the last conversations I had with him, he phoned me up. He used to phone me up out of the blue sometimes when we weren't on doing the golf, and he'd say, "Hello," and he'd chat away, and he'd say, I saw you on the snooker. I just wanted to say, you've got to tell Ronnie O'Sullivan, I think he's marvellous." And he just loved he loved people who were sporting geniuses. He could appreciate artistry and talent, and he loved to watch inspired sportsmen, whether they were golfers, whatever. He watched everything, John. He loved it. He was imbued with this passion, and it would come out in what he did. So yeah. And one other observation I should give you. A lot of people felt that Peter was the ultimate live broadcaster, which he was, because he never worked to script. He would always say it as he called it. Sometimes it got him into hot water, but he was nothing if not honest, and such a generous man in everything he did. On and off the air, by the way. There's too many stories of his generosity even to go with. But
he was a great man, certainly. I mean, I as I said, I had many happy hours just sitting in a chair listening to him in his living room. So it was brilliant stuff.
A lot of people felt that Peter's genius was just the technical, it was just the live broadcasting side. But I can also tell you, John, when we were doing edited highlights programs, which were really not that much fun, if I'm honest, because you lose the spontaneity, and you're working much of the time retrospectively, having seen what you're doing. It's just a necessary evil, unfortunately, these days. But that's technically one of the most difficult things you can do in sports broadcasting is to do an edited highlights golf program, which is due out and of a certain duration within the hour, because and play is still happening. It's an absolute. It takes nerves of steel in order to be able to do that, because you're working right on the wire. You can't stop. You can't make mistakes, but you know that you've got literally 15 seconds. It's shot, circumstance, say something interesting, shushed, because it's going to start. And it's really difficult. But I have to be honest, Peter was one of the absolute best. His mental discipline was extraordinary in those circumstances. He rarely, if ever, fluffed and had to do it again. In exceptional circumstances, we'd have to rewind and do it. We had to do it. It was more or less as live. But his contribution, which was not just, club, distance, situation, stop. He would always be able to say something which illuminated those pictures, even in those very restrictive situations. So as a technical broadcaster, he was marvellous. Marvellous, he really was. So, yes, Peter... still very large presence in the lives of many who love golf.
We've talked a bit about the Open. I've been to the Masters umpteen times as you have, and that it's a unique place in many ways, not least for the rules and regulations that certainly we journalists have to adhere to. What was it like broadcasting the Masters? Was it more difficult, easier, or just different?
It was very different, but in some respects, some of the rules, the no running rule, the calmness, there's no mobile phones. In some respects, a sort of step backwards technologically in our everyday lives was truly, truly frustrating and truly wonderful, all at the same time. To be able to say, okay, I can't phone you from the course when we're out filming. I will meet you at 1 o'clock under the big tree at the clubhouse was fabulous. I know, it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But to be accountable and available and in contact all the time is a pressure that we all live with in our lives. But to have that taken away was brilliant. It was also really difficult to operate with, but I respected it, and I was made absolutely certain that it did not go anywhere with me, the mobile phone, for fear of being turfed out and never allowed back. So some of the restrictions were, that they're unique, but those are the rules of the game at the Masters. And let's be honest, it is the most wonderful championship, tournament, I beg your pardon, be careful, get it right.
Mm-hmm.
It's the most wonderful tournament, and I loved it. One of the last, when I knew that I was going to call time on it, I went to the last of the Masters, and I remember sitting in my presenter's chair with all of the beautiful flowers around us, looking out onto this manicured practice ground, which had sort of appeared overnight the previous year, and looking out. And I remember my floor manager, Chris White, and some of the others there in the background of the studio, and the kettle had gone on. I was commentating part of the time. The guys were doing their commentary from elsewhere. It was very calm. The play was going on. I remember getting my mobile phone, which was allowed at that point, you're right, in the studio. I didn't do anything wrong. And I remember switching it to video mode, and I just put it on the desk so I could look down, and I put it on the video mode so that I could hear the bluebirds and all of the bird song, and just that sort of boom of heat that you know that I'm talking about. Just the sounds and the atmosphere and the crowd. And I put it on for about half an hour, and I just recorded the sound, and I still have it, so that I can put myself, and there was a slight trickle of commentary, but I thought, I just want to remember the sound of Augusta. That's for me the essence of it. It's such a sort of sensory place, isn't it? But the heat and the birds and the sudden noises that you get from excited parts of the crowd all over the course, it's just magical. There's nothing else like it. And those are, it's not so much the electronics and the broadcasting and the golf, although that's wonderful, but it's the whole atmosphere that goes with that tournament that's so inviting and so visceral, and makes you want to go back into that warmth again and again. I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
But was broadcasting more difficult? Was there rules? Was there things that you cannot say this unless the big hand comes down? And
I never felt that, John. No, I never felt that. No, I think if you work like that in fear of what you're going to say, then you're going to say it. I never felt under any, don't say that. Well, your mind's already thinking about it. No, I did what I always did, and that was to broadcast in the most effective and appropriate manner. Trying to tell the story as best I could. I never had to change my style in order to fit Augusta's rules. And to be honest, John, I don't think anybody did. I think, I'm not sure if it's a myth, but I never felt like I was being listened to or scrutinised in any way, any more than I was when you're broadcasting to 4 million people. That's a pressure in itself, and you try and adapt your. Well, that's just the discipline of broadcasting, isn't it? That's how you operate. You operate at that level of trying to say things that are appropriate when you're broadcasting. You would rarely say, well, you would certainly try not to be inappropriate in any way. So, no, I never felt that pressure. Didn't feel it.
Every broadcaster I've ever talked to has got a story of the cock-up, the mistake, whether you've something's happened, it's gone wrong. It's not necessarily been your fault, but something has gone wrong. And it's very difficult when you're sitting there with the world looking at you with a camera. Is there anything that comes to mind with you?
Oh, John, there's loads. I can't. It's always the same when you're asked that question. Your mind just goes a blank, and then afterwards you think, oh yeah, there was that time. There were many times that things went wrong, but I think that I genuinely think the mark of a decent broadcaster is to keep paddling. The number of things that go wrong behind the scenes that you would never know because you're not allowed to know, because you just keep talking when the VT fails or the person who says they're going to be there is not there, so you have to fill until something else can be found or an appropriate guest can say something. Oh gosh, I wish I could come up with something ridiculously daft, and if you give me another 10 minutes I probably could. You kind of caught me on the hop with that one, John. There's so many, but I honestly can't think of anything off the top of my head that.
Well, don't worry about it. I do have other questions up my sleeve.
Okay, good. Okay, well, I'll try and think about it once you do it.
Right. Okay. For example, I'm always intrigued a little bit by the difference, if there is a difference, or has there been a difference for you between broadcasting and journalism? Is there a difference? I mean, you've dipped your toe into, well, certainly in journalism, and you've done a lot more broadcasting, I know, but is a difference between the two disciplines?
I think they're fundamentally entwined for me. I don't differentiate between journalism and broadcasting because for me, broadcasting is journalism. The way I approach it is in a very journalistic way. I know my facts. I've spoken to people about, I've spoken to interviewees. I've spoken to other people. The questions I ask are, I hope, journalistic in nature. I rarely stray into, wow, that was great, wasn't it, territory. I always think very carefully about the way I would phrase a question. I would hope that every question I ask is based upon fact or is expressed or expresses a desire to know something that I genuinely don't know. So no, I see no difference at all. The way I prepare, the way I write a script, the way I think is predicated purely on journalism, I would say. It's my training. It's what I've always done. In fact, I think as I've got older as a broadcaster, I rely more and more on the basics that I was taught and had to learn when I was just a baby broadcaster coming through in the late 1980s. So I see no difference at all, John. In fact, I think the two, I think with the greatest of respect, I think the best broadcasters are those who have been journalists. I think there's definitely a place for those who've come. Everybody learns journalism a different way. You don't have to go to college. You don't have to, but you have to learn the basics, clearly, whether or not you have been in marketing, whether you've been in professional sport, whatever it is. But you serve your time in that respect, and I think a lot of it is experience. So for me, it's over 30-something years of experience, and I think that I can't help it. My whole ethos and the way I prepare and the way I broadcast and the way I write is just my training in journalism. So there's no difference for me now. I'm interested in how you differentiate. Can you see a difference in those who are broadcasters and those who are journalists? Do you know? I'm interested in where that question comes from.
Well, it often frustrates me, especially in the former players who've gravitated into television broadcasting particularly. It frustrates me because, especially the ones I know well, and I know the depth of the knowledge that they have and the things that they say, off air, if you like, they're clearly, either they don't feel they're allowed to say these things or they're told not to say these things, particularly things that could be perceived as negative. And it does frustrate me a little bit in that they descend into cheerleaders more than they should, because I know that these guys have got so much to offer, and I don't see it happening on television, sadly.
Well, that's an interesting point, because it's been one of my bugbears over the years, not with fellow broadcasters, not at all. But I think sport has become such big business now, and I think also that the rewards in sport and in broadcasting are such that, let's say, for example, the Olympic Games. I am not a we and us person, because I was never trained to be a we and us person. Those who are achieving medals for Great Britain are achieving medals as British athletes. They are not we. We are not cheering we. And I'm very careful to try and avoid that. I just think that it always strikes me as maybe even unprofessional. I look at other. Wherever you are in the world doing broadcasts, you will look at the local stations. And what always frustrates me is, for example, if I'm watching the Olympics in whichever country I'm in, and I'm watching host broadcaster coverage, I think it's so important that you don't just say where our guy or our girl finished in the 100 metres freestyle. They were 6th or 7th. You must, as a matter of common decency, say who was 1st, 2nd and 3rd. And the fact that is the first Nepali, and I love that. You've got to say that is the first medal for Barbados in 27 or 28 years, whatever it is. I love that. That to me is so important. It's much more than we've got 27 medals. That's great. But for me, the best stories that come out of Olympic Games are the ones where, and it goes back to my earlier point, John, that's why sport is so important. It gives people something to aim at when they see their fellow countrymen and women doing something that is important in a national context. And I think it's so important to recognise the feats that many other nations do. I get an absolute kick out of that. You just ask any of my colleagues, I am banging the drum about the fact that Peru's got the first walking medal since 1968. I just love that. So if I come at it from that perspective, it's trained into me that you must be equitable and fair, but also be interested in others. I'm not there to cheer my own. I'm interested to ask the questions of people who happen to be from my country and countries from everywhere around the world, because I'm interested, and I think it's only decent and fair to do that. So I get where you're coming from. I think you have to be very careful as a broadcaster not to do it. I think it's the thin end of the wedge, because then if you do it too often, then you can't ask the hard questions. for fear of coming across as someone that's going to batter someone. You've got to ask a question that is hard, but in a fair way. And I think then you gain respect. If you're just going to blow smoke, then people don't respect you. If they know you're going to get an even-handed time with you, but you're still going to be asked, I think that's very important. Sorry, I do sound like I'm on my soapbox now, but you've touched a nerve with me. It's the fundamental part of broadcasting is to be even-handed across the board.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, recently I went to Dubai and covered the Asia Pacific Amateur Championship, and I really enjoyed that for the kind of the reasons that you've just talked about. I got to interview guys from all over the place, and my favourite was the lad from Cambodia, who's the only player who's played in all 12 of the Asia Pacific Amateur Championships. Now, he's never made the cut, and I'm fairly sure that he's never going to make the cut. But that's not the point. The fact is that golf has grown in Cambodia over the 12 years. Not necessarily because of him, but it's more popular than it was, and it's growing. And that's the bigger point of that championship, was just to grow the game in weird places rather than find out who the best player is. Yeah.
Precisely. And that, as a sports fan and a journalist, is where it goes for me. Yeah.
I kind of dragged you off the BBC a little bit. There was two questions I had about that. It was you finished in 2017 after 25 years of doing the golf or presenting the golf in various ways. What brought you to that decision? And do you, like me, lament the lack of golf on the BBC, or the dearth of golf these days? I used to love, like you, I would be the guy who closed the curtains on Thursday morning and watched the golf like you did. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen anymore. But it's a two-part question. But I just wondered how you felt about those things.
Well, first part of your question: why did I decide to do it? I did it for various reasons. Some of which I can be open with you, and some of which, due to other reasons, I won't. But fundamentally, we've had a few health problems in our family that we've had to deal with, and unfortunately it meant being away from my family for quite a lot of time. So something had to give, and after travelling the world and having an amazing time in that respect, I just felt that I had to devote more of my time to a family which needed me more than it had done. And without, I don't want to go into that because it wouldn't be fair. So fundamentally, everybody has commitments and priorities, and the health of my family was number one, and that is the reason why I made the decision to step down. Secondly, in terms of the way golfing politics has gone. The world has changed so much, even from when I started broadcasting in 1987. There were, I think, 4 main channels. I think Channel 4 just started. And now the proliferation of television stations and the power and the money and the sponsorship in terms of sports broadcasting, it's changed. I should really write the book, shouldn't I? I should really write that book, John.
Yeah.
Because it's well over a quarter of a century of change that I've been able to have a ringside seat at, from literally being the second woman in Britain to be presenting a major sports programme after Sally McNair, to being one of hundreds. So, having had that seat and having been a part of it has been fascinating. But I think we are where we are. It is. I'd love to see more live golf, but it's not. It's. I'm not a staff member. I don't know many of the reasons, but it is the direction of travel at the moment, and I think I'm still very privileged to be able to provide my services on some occasions for BBC Sport. It is the greatest honour of my career to be able to do the Olympics and to be able to still do some of the snooker. and I get a real kick out of that. So I think, and I do think that when BBC Sport is up and running in terms of these major events, there are very, very few better. There are very, very few organisations who would do it better. So I'm still absolutely thrilled to be able to do that, really.
That's what makes me sad, though, Hazel, is that the BBC are so good at that. I mean, they've had iconic figures in many sports. Peter Allis is the obvious one in golf, and Peter O'Sullivan in the horse racing, and Bill McLaren in the rugby, and all the rest of it. I miss it. That's basically what I'm saying. I mean, this is an emotional question for me, really.
Yeah, I miss it too. I used to do Grandstand, which was a sort of potpourri, a cornucopia of all the best bits that were curated, but it was the same with ITV's World of Sport. It was the same situation, wasn't it? We had Dickie Davis and we had that was what we did. But the world has changed. You watched for 4 hours on a Saturday, and you got the football results, all the rest of it. But the world has changed. Things have changed. We are in a different broadcasting landscape with a proliferation of channels and competing interests, and that's where we are. That is the reality of the situation. So I agree with you. But we do sound like a couple of old dinosaurs in many respects, don't we? Because we miss what we grew up with, don't we?
We're getting old, Hazel. Me more than you, but
No, but it's what we knew. It's what we knew when we were kids, and it's what we relied on was the whole Saturday afternoon of sport. But the kids of 10 years ago and the kids of today, that's not their reality. Their reality is they have a plethora of ways of consuming sport. They don't just watch the TV. I mean, they access it through clips, they access it through social media. The way they consume sport is fundamentally different to the way we do it too. So we also have to address these things too. So it's not just BBC or ITV, it's the whole gamut of media outlets now that are having to change according to the demographics who are watching it and according to the habits by which we consume sport. So it's just the reality we're in, John. We just have to face it.
I know. There's nobody doing what I used to do. At 4 o'clock on a Saturday, I would go down to my grandmother's and I'd get a plate of chips, and she and I would sit and watch the wrestling, Mick McManus and giant haystacks and all those.
Giant haystacks. You see, now we really do sound old.
Yeah. Hazel, I'm conscious I've kept you long enough. I'm going to end with the great cliched question of, certainly in golf, what would be the highlights for you of the time you broadcast the golf?
Oh, goodness. The highlights for me would be the people I worked with, the teams I was part of, the situations that I was given responsibility to tell the story about, the mad panic / thrill of hours and hours and weeks of preparation beforehand, the satisfaction of being there and being able to tell you something about everyone whenever I was called upon to do a leaderboard or do an interview, the feeling of being on top of it, and the feeling of sharing in something truly unique, unscripted, wonderfully dramatic, thrilling. And there were many times, John, I sat back in the back nine of a major and just thought, man, this is fantastic. There is nowhere else I would rather be at this moment than right here watching this, talking about that person or that putt or that drive. It was just magical, engrossing, and one of the great satisfactions of my career. And the places that I went to, the opportunities I was given, and the satisfaction of knowing that for reasons that I've articulated, I was able to say, I've enjoyed that. I've done as much as I know I can do at the for the time being, and I'm quite happy to say that's enough for now. I have to put my energies into my family for the time being. I think all of these things, and the other thing that I can go back to these places in my mind anytime I like, or back into my little phone and listen to my recording of the Masters, or indeed pick up my clubs and go down to my local course and have a few holes. That is why golf is meaningful to me. And to have been part of it, to play a small part in it, and to be able to still play it is a great thrill. And to be able to talk about it and still watch it and still get a thrill from watching it that's the answer to the question. That's the thing about golf for me. It's always there, and I hope it always will be.
What a great way to finish. Hazel, thank you very much for your time. It's been a joy, as ever. I always like talking to you. It's never been less than interesting, and you haven't let me down. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, John, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for asking me. It's as ever, John, whether it's formally or informally, it is always a joy to speak to you. Thank you.
What a terrific chat from somebody with a very different perspective of the game, Hazel Irvine, with some great insights there. Well, that's it for episode 56 of The Thing About Golf, and indeed for season 2021. We'll be taking a break over the Christmas period, though there is no shortage of material in the back catalogue to listen or re-listen to while we're gone. We hope that you enjoy that, and we look forward to your company again when we come back in the new year.